This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.
Welcome to Outrage Overload, a science podcast about outrage and lowering the temperature. This is episode 86.
This kind of conversation across this kind of difference is the new counterculture. What is expected is, rhetorical grenade throwing on social media across these divides. What is unexpected and countercultural is conversation.
It's easy to strawman an opponent. It's even easier to imagine the devil on the other side of the screen. We've reached a point where even making space for a disagreement is seen as a concession. And that and so much more is what we're going to talk about on this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. I'm your host, David Beckmeyer, and our guest today is at the front lines of this movement.
Hi, this is Mónica Guzmán. I'm the author of I Never Thought of It That Way, How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. I'm also the host of A Braver Way podcast and an advisor to Braver Angels, Disagree Better, and the Viewpoints Project, basically obsessed with how we stay curious across divides for all our sakes.
Mónica Guzmán is someone who has mastered the art of bridging without compromising her own convictions. And today, she's helping us understand the complexities of American discourse. It's a deep dive, but a necessary one. So let's get to it right now. Mónica Guzmán, thank you so much and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, David. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I've really been looking forward to this. It's fantastic that you're able to come on our little program. And, you're just a icon in this space. For me, I want to strike a balance between, first-time listeners and long-time listeners. I know we could spend a lot of time sort of going over a lot of the basics of kind of bridge building and better dialogue and things like that. But I also feel like your work has really influenced a lot of those other guests and past guests we've had talking about those things. It's also influenced my own thinking on these things. So I feel like I kind of owe it to my longtime listeners to take advantage of this opportunity to speak to someone of your caliber and expertise in this, to really dig into some of these kind of harder questions that people keep raising about this work. One thing I seem to see a lot is people kind of intellectually agree with kind of the bridge building and dialogue, but they kind of viscerally resist it. I mean, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's rare for people not to agree with the idea or think that it's a nice and good idea. I think for some folks, they count themselves out of it because they feel like their personalities just clash with things. I really care about these issues. Maybe those folks who can be nice just aren't committed enough. Or really, bridge building is honestly reaching just folks in the middle. I'm not in the middle. I'm on the wings of things and I believe where I am. So I'm not gonna water that down for anybody. So that's part of it. There are some folks who believe that bridge building tends to distract from things that really need to be fixed in the ways they need to be fixed. So when you've got all these folks going, let's understand each other, all you've really got is people who are taking attention away from the things that the world needs. So there's a lot of folks in that camp for sure. And by the way, each of these things I have responses to. There's definitely more than meets the eye. There's a lot of folks who see a lot of danger, unconquerable fear and risk to these conversations. And they'll ask questions like, how am I supposed to engage with someone who thinks I shouldn't exist, for example? There's definitely folks who say, but they are intellectually dishonest. They are bad actors. They won't listen, or I or my side are always the ones who are curious and they won't be curious about me. So there's no reciprocity. Therefore, it's a non-starter for me. I also think of the many folks out there who have ended friendships or, burned bridges or relationships with their own family, for example. And that's a painful decision. That's a really hard decision. And so, it can come with some some sense of sort of right and might, and that makes it difficult then to kind of reopen the idea of understanding someone who believes that thing that qualified someone for never coming back to Thanksgiving with me. So the boundaries we draw, and then let's also not forget that a lot of it is about the heat out there in the world, and I've heard a lot of folks, especially recently, feel like they kind of hit their bar. Nope, things are now too real, stakes are too high. So those are among the things I hear.
Yeah, exactly. And I one version of this that I've been hearing more lately is, that, I'm not going to stop using, a word like, let's just take a label like fascism, right? Okay, I'm not going to stop saying that because words have meaning. You can't make me not say it. You're taking away my power in some way. Or, I've seen things like, well, sometimes you just can't equivocate. You have to call it what it is. Some people see that as like it's being reasonable as a way to help unreasonable people win. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. And it reminds me of the battles around truth, right? If there's many issues out there where, one side or another is quite sure they've got the truth, and the truth is this. So if someone is disagreeing with that or would even question it, then if I engage with that person or that argument, I am betraying truth. And I have no interest in that, because that leads us down so many dark holes. Whether that's like a society in general that just decides to deprioritize truth or worse. So yeah, that is a very, very deep and big barrier. And you also brought up this question of language. Unfortunately, but also naturally, language is kind of the first battleground for all of this. And as different camps and different ideological groupings have become more familiar with each other and more aversive to everyone else, we have developed our own languages, each of these camps. And so, for one person, calling something fascist is just, well, it's just what we call it these days. Whereas for another person, it is loaded with so much that can, feel so blinded against something, or so condescending or so judgy or whatever, that it's just, So language is the best technology we have to try to convey meaning between us. It's a very imperfect technology, because what one word means to me is different from what one word means to somebody else, even if it means the same thing in the dictionary. It doesn't matter. That doesn't matter politically and socially. It's the meaning that it's charged with in our discourse that matters. So, yeah. But coming back to your point, I mean, is the answer to simply abandon the language that means what it means to me? I don't think so. I don't think that's the answer. And so for people who think I will not betray my sense of what's true, I guess what I would say broadly is you don't have to. You don't have to in order to achieve what bridge building writ large ultimately promises.
And I guess it's something that you mentioned too in the sort of list of things that you had a counterpoint. You said you had a counterpoint for all of them.
Yeah. I don't know if everyone will accept it, but I have one.
Right. Yeah. Well, I know, because I think some of them they've heard before. But,
for sure.
And something you specifically talked about too, like, it's kind of like, why would I want to build a bridge to someone who wants to hurt me or take away my rights? And I think one thing that I see a lot that I try to talk to people about is sometimes we hear about bridge building and we think in our mind, someone talks about this idea of bridge building, and then our mind jumps to this, who's the most extreme person I know?
Yeah.
And
exactly.
That's not going to work with that person. When maybe we should start somewhere else, like start with someone that's a little more adjacent to us. But anyway,
exactly.
Maybe you have some thoughts on that general idea that I like, why would I want to build a bridge with this person anyway?
Yeah. I do want to highlight the dynamic that you just brought up, because I've spoken with so many folks, churches, living rooms, community groups, governments. I mean, boy. And this is another version of straw manning to me. And that straw manning is this idea of you take sort of the weakest argument on the other side and you attack that and say, I've won, right? And this is a different kind of the same thing of straw manning. So our imagination is very strong in times like these because our anxiety is very high and our fear is very high. So, especially at a time when we are more siloed into our different ideological camps than ever, with red zip codes becoming redder and blue zip codes becoming bluer, it means that we have far fewer opportunities to check the rhetoric and sometimes hyperbole that we hear about those ideas or those people with actual real people, flesh and blood people. So we tend to imagine a caricature of the person who would believe the thing or of the belief itself. And that's based on all kinds of signals that we get, and it's just kind of naturally part of our media ecosystem, but we don't have anything to check it with. So I would say that's another version of straw manning. And so the same way that straw manning an argument is a dishonest way of evaluating that argument, then straw manning each other is a dishonest way of evaluating each other. And each other's arguments and each other's sort of qualifications for having discussions about what's important to us as a society. I love this anecdote that a bridge builder that you've probably run into, John Powell of the Othering and Belonging Institute, talks about how he's a bridge builder. He talks about these things. And one day a pastor brought up this same objection by saying, "John, are you asking me to bridge with the devil?" And John said, "Maybe don't start there. Don't start with whoever the devil is in your mind, the most extreme person." Now, those people do exist, of course. There are people so consumed by hate that they are worth fearing. But what all the research shows us is that there's far fewer of them than we think. So we have to compensate for that somehow. And what John says is, don't think that the job is to build the longest bridge you can imagine to the most hateful person. I mean, not only is that kind of not very pragmatic, like how often are you actually going to run it? I mean, some of us will, sure. But not only is that not very pragmatic, it's also just not very useful, and it will scare us, and therefore keep us away from conversations that might otherwise be quite nuanced and quite moderating, which also makes me think of the research that's come out about how people keep underestimating how much they will actually sometimes enjoy conversations across difference. We think of the worst case and we think that's what we're talking about. And we say, no, never, not me. But is that real? Is that thing in your imagination representative of the folks that you are actually likely to run into? And if not, then how might your reticence to even approach folks who might be different be contributing to the misperceptions of who's out there and what they actually believe?
Exactly. Well, and it makes it even harder when you don't have any experience with it, and then you sort of get thrown into that. And I think that's what happens for a lot of us, that we're so used to being in our bubble. When we go kind of outside it and we say the thing that always has been super popular in our bubble, and we wonder why it's not popular when we're in this mixed company. And so having more experience with that, I think does make that a little bit less of a shock. Like, it literally can, like, what? How is this not? How do you not see this? Right?
No, you're absolutely right. Because these repeated habits of sameness that we're in condition us to not be ready for even sometimes the most minimal challenge or the most minimal surprise or pushback from someone who doesn't see it your way. And so yes, I think our capacity for dealing with that and staying in the room is lower in many of these places where the siloing has gotten really strong. So I think we should have a lot of understanding of ourselves and a lot of grace for that. I think of my friend Manu Meal. I don't know if you've run into his work, Bridge USA. They're sort of the Braver Angels for college. And maybe we'll get to some of that. But he has been saying something I think is really true, which is that this kind of conversation across this kind of difference is the new counterculture. What is expected is, rhetorical grenade throwing on social media across these divides. What is unexpected and countercultural is conversation. And that, and so in other words, it's sort of flipped it on its head, because the idea that this is what sort of the nice, weak people do. No, this is what people with some guts often are the ones doing. So yeah, let's take a look at that, if it seems sort of tepid and conceding, it's like, is it? Because when you're able to withstand a lot of disagreement and still stand firm on your convictions, that's amazing. Like, how was that weak? How was that nice? That's that's something else, and that is really hard. I mean, it's been hard for me, and I wrote a book on it. It's still hard.
Yeah, I've been trained, and I've gone to course
Yeah.
after course, and it's still hard.
There's no amount of training
Yeah.
that makes this comfortable. Let's make that clear to everybody. But courage is not about scary things suddenly becoming comfortable, right? Courage is about the choice to do something that's really scary and carries risk, and just doing it anyway because you think it's the right thing to do.
Well, we've talked a little bit, like sort of, it's like a radical, it's a new radical, position, or it's a way to be radical, like you say. You call it counterculture, or like it's a way to be kind of doing the thing that not everybody's doing, instead of the easy thing, which is just kind of staying in your bubble.
Yeah, yeah. And this is not, by the way, to discount. There are people who are pushing the things they believe with the toolkits of activism. And there's a lot of courage that comes into play there too. So that's not to discount. Like, different people play different roles because they have different strengths and different passions at any given moment. And I am very good friends with folks who don't have a whole lot of interest in spending as much time as I do, reaching across political divides. They're spending that amount of time mobilizing and raising awareness about this or that issue. And that's exactly what we need. We need all these things in balance, though. And so I'm afraid that we're living at a time when, we've got a lot of mobilization on certain issues, but it's not balanced out by others making sure that there's an osmosis, that there's a way of checking our assumptions and our projections with some people that we know who are actually talking amongst themselves across difference. And because we have so little of that, it's like our immunity to rhetoric that could really inflame us with lies is gone. And we need to be really careful, because at that point we become tools of someone's partisan game. And we forget how to think for ourselves. Like, that's the nightmare, as a society, if we lose a bit of that resilience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we sort of get outrage overload.
There you go. Why am I even telling you? You know exactly where this leads.
Yeah, and I have there's a whole lot of stuff I'd love to talk about there. But I wanted to get one thing in that's this is kind of selfish, although again, it is something, it's kind of a mirroring a little bit of some of the kind of sentiment I hear from listeners too. But it's something that, I'm struggling with right now. We've been struggling with in the bridge building community. Many of us are kind of having these conversations in the back channels about, and it's a good example of this idea of checking yourself, because when you have a lot of support for a position that's, a lot of experts, seem to say this, theoretically, these are nonpartisan experts. This is a nonpartisan expert view. And you get this view, and in the end, it kind of points towards one partisan side or the other. Like, at what point, as a bridge builder, if we're transparent about it and say, hey, this is what all these experts say, it seems like we can do that. It's like sometimes people feel like, though, that has to be taken off the table. If it lands in a partisan way at the end, like it points towards partisan direction, now we're not allowed to talk to it. Right. And I'm curious just to get your take on that.
I struggle with the same thing, and I see that exact same reflex. Absolutely. And I share that reflex as a bridge builder. I think I've been kind of trained to always suspect, if the truth keeps pointing one of two sides, then what does checking yourself mean? And at what point do you say, I guess I've checked myself and that side is right, and the fact that those experts all seem to line up on one side should not be a reason to doubt what's going on. This is really tricky. I have my answer to this, and it's come from a lot of, my conversations with folks who hold the opposite political view from me. I've come to see that the divides are not just red and blue. They're not just liberal conservative. They're also establishment, anti-establishment. They're also folks who come with the professional conditioning of believing things that come in certain formats, and from certain places, and folks who come with a stronger tradition of skepticism of those places because there's been distrust that's been sown, and they feel that they are entitled to that distrust and to exploring it all the way down. When I look at it from that perspective, then I just see another divide, right? So yes, there are experts. And for me, many of those experts are a heck of a lot better than most people I know at pointing to the right things. But I don't know. I talk to people whose experience has told them that those experts don't speak for them very well. Mm-hmm. And then I go, all right, where's my loyalty, to the experts or to the people around me and to what they're seeing and knowing in their gut? And I mean, I don't have an answer to that. Of course, I believe experts. That's just, yes, it depends. You know, obviously we're speaking in huge generalities, but I guess I've just met enough people and heard enough stories about where the experts have been really, really wrong in ways that really were true for them. And that I can see where I'm like, I get it. I get that skepticism. And we need to solve that skepticism, not try to browbeat people into believing all the experts that they distrust, if that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah, we've had experts, researchers that have looked into these things. And yeah, it's a challenging problem. Mm-hmm. You know, and something else you mentioned there, I think it's important, and I don't necessarily have the answer, but maybe you have some ideas too, is one of the problems. I think the paradigm of this right-left, left, right, conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, I mean, just framing everything in that paradigm also is just makes everything harder because, like you said, many things, it's not really the right dimensions we should be looking at. And as you said earlier that, we talked about the misperception idea is when we frame everything in that, it's usually a misperception because, the more and more I learn about this, the more I learn there sort of is no such thing as somebody on a place on that spectrum because all of us are actually individuals with all kinds of views. Yes. And we never align with these caricatures we hear about on social media and on the TV and so on. But none of us really internalize that like as a reality that most of us don't fit that caricature in some way, because it's such a strong pull. It just sucks us back in that we frame everything in that model. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that because I don't know what the right paradigm is. I've seen lots of different attempts at sort of doing 3 and 4 dimensions and so on, but I don't really know what the right paradigm is. But I do know the left-right paradigm's sort of hurting us.
It's clearly failing. I think I saw a statistic or something from the Associated Press, might be worth double checking everyone, but I think it was something like 45% of Americans identify as independent.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about the failure of the right left. And it seems like every other person I talk to tells me that they are politically homeless.
Right.
So I think it's clear that our labels have ceased to be very useful. But there is so much in those labels, and they have built up so much identity for so many people who are now so hooked on those identities. It is very difficult for people to come back and reevaluate all of that. There is really good research coming out that I think is going to help us. I don't know if you've seen incredible research from More in Common. It came out January 20th, but just remarkable, I think really insightful on the American right. And they're going to follow up with similar research on the American left. And they just ask the kinds of questions that, push back on some of these conventional ways of grouping people. And I think it's going to be really useful for us. Not to say anything of what you were saying about just the eternal truth that any grouping, any label is ultimately a failure, right? When you talk to an individual, if you believe the label, you hear the label and you go, aha, you've downloaded everything about that person. I mean, clearly you're missing a lot. And I never... when I sit back and I think, well, if somebody who has, a little punch list of my labels thinks that they know me, I mean, that's obviously crap, so we do this to each other all the time. So we have to get behind them anyway. Well, let's get behind them. The thing is, I think that as anxious and as afraid as we are, those labels are more than just, useful ways of grasping other people. They've also become shields. We make our boundaries and we hear that somebody is this and we go, stay away. So that reifies the labels all the more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's powerful. Like even when like I said, even when you tell people 45% are independent, or you say people have these cross-cutting things and the data shows this and the data shows that, it's like, it's just so powerful. People just still believe, I've talked to people about that more in Common Study and point out some of the things there, and they're just go, that doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
It's not intuitively right.
It's not. At the end of the day, any social science that tries to explain people is never going to succeed, but it is going to succeed in a partial way, right?
Yeah, it's going
to help us look at it at a different, it's going to add nuance, and that's all we can do. But when it comes to, that's to me the sickness. The sickness is anything that gets in the way of, I am person A and I'm talking to person B, and I want to talk to person B as person A. I want them to figure out who I am, and I want to figure out who they are. And anything we bring that's a shortcut to that, is gonna hurt our ability to do that. So yeah, that sickness has always been there. It will always be there to some degree. To some extent, there's no way around it. We can't be, spending our entire lives in explanation. Obviously, we need some levers. We need some handles on each other. We do, and that's useful in lots of ways. But at this point, it's like, there's so up and down the whole vertical, from the political parties all the way down to like the person next door. These labels are not even accurate anymore. What do they even mean? We don't know. Like, it's time to revisit what this all even is. And not to mention, the last couple of years politically, I've seen so much acceleration of change that I think we owe ourselves nothing less than to ask a whole lot of questions about things we thought were established.
Yeah, getting back a little bit to some of the kind of, we've actually addressed a lot of the kind of list of things that I often hear from folks. We've kind of covered it, even if a little obliquely, but I wanted to get back to one that I've heard, that I know you kind of mentioned this as well, that a lot of people feel like the burden is always on the sane people to to do all the acquiescing or whatever, right? Some people would say sort of bend over backwards to be empathetic and this kind of stuff. Yet, meanwhile, there's kind of these semi-bad actors. It's media or politicians or somebody else, that aren't doing that at all. Having some resilience to just not getting so nihilistic about it as a result of that.
I see. Yeah. I got you. Yeah. For that, man, I used to love being in social media. I used to love doing all the comments. I used to love the debates, and it's just not what it used to be, man. There are some spaces and some platforms where it's become such a game, and it's become so conditioned, and so many, channels have been dug in these particular directions, that given that I find the world a wondrous place, even in those places where it's anxiety inducing, that there's still so much to learn, I try to pick and choose the places where I go to do that. And I do think that there are some places that twist our behaviors in really bad ways. I can't tell you the number of people who I've met in person, like, incredible, wonderful people. And they'll tell me, I can't believe what I wrote on Facebook the other day. Man, I was hurtful. I don't know what happened to me. It's like, well, I know what happened to you. That's what these spaces can do. So I think we just have to be judicious about where we spend our time. Now, when it comes to politicians, because this is different. You're talking about politicians who seem to indulge in really contemptible behavior.
Well, it opened the most recent, campaign email, right? And what's it begin with? These guys are terrible. We have to vote them out. And here's why they're so evil and why we have to get rid of them.
God. Well, look, everybody's got their ways, right? The way I cope with that is to understand where it comes from. I know the world I'm in. I know the political games that need to be played. I know the water out there. And yeah, I know that there are so many kind of cheap ways to mobilize people, get their money, get their support for your campaign by getting them mad. I know that. And you know that. So I don't know, to what extent do I, this is an open question, right? It's going to sound really weird, but to what extent can I blame one individual politician for making a choice that puts them at an advantage toward their goals of getting reelected, of getting elected at all, of raising money, when they themselves did not build the system that stacked the incentives in those ways? And I do blame them. I do. But I think I can only blame them so far because it is a system. It is a network effect. It's not just the one. So what I do also is I really elevate and celebrate the politicians who do not do that, and who stand out for that. Governor Spencer Cox is well known. The Republican governor of Utah has made a whole thing out of standing up for this. And on Disagree Better, his organization's website, they actually have these wonderful tips, and they're really good for elected officials to replace this language with that language. Why not try that? But it still remains true that if you don't play the dirty, you won't get the money. So what are we supposed to do about that? And I think it's a bigger question. I think it's a question that involves far more than politicians' behavior. It involves the roots, the soil in which politicians' behavior grew. And that's the same soil that we're getting into the compost of. We're part of that soil. So it's all one system. So I try to, it's going to sound crazy, but I try to empathize with that. I see it as a symptom. Of course it's also contributing, but it's also a symptom. That's the same way that I see, Uncle Bob saying that horrible thing again. It's a symptom. So I don't know. I think we're all part of this. We're all implicated. None of us is blameless, and none of us is entirely to blame.
Yeah, and we talk about Uncle Bob a lot on this show.
Do you guys also just resort to Uncle Bob?
We resort to Uncle Bob.
I'm so sorry for all the Bobs out there. It's just the thing that comes to mind. Talk about conditioning. I should change it to Uncle Jim. I don't know.
Yeah.
Even that seems a little vanilla. I got to figure it out.
And, something else you said there, we were talking earlier about sort of the bravery thing. I mean, for Spencer Cox to do a lot of the stuff that he's doing and the people that cooperate with him and do that with him, that's a lot of bravery because, again, that's challenging in these times.
Yeah. And I got to say, too, that I've been to Utah a bunch, and there's something about Utah. The Utah culture, there's some things going on over there that I think have just made it a little more of a fertile ground for these kinds of things to emerge and survive. And there's other places where so we're grateful for the sprouts that can sprout.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to ask. So we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges in this space, and I'm hoping, we've inspired people to sort of stick with it and maybe put some of the effort in. But what are some of the things that you really see working out there? Like, what are some institutions that are getting it right? You mentioned Spencer Cox. What else are you sort of optimistic about, and you see this is really working? I know Braver Angels has revised a little bit and is going in some new directions, if I understand it right. So I'm curious just to hear who's getting some of this right, and what do you see that's working out there?
Yeah, Braver Angels has what we call our North Star. Since last year is courageous citizenship, which means something really beautiful and really specific and very shared. And we've got, as you know, chapters all over the country, and everyone's sinking their teeth into this in new ways. The debate program at Braver Angels has really blossomed in amazing ways. So for anyone who hasn't checked out a Braver Angels debate, which is not actually a competitive debate where someone is crowned a winner, but is a collective search for truth with a structure that really works. And I'm a debate chair at Braver Angels, so I have run Braver Angels debates on, things as controversial as trans care for minors. And boy, the things that it just will knock your socks off. So I'm a huge proponent of those sorts of organized, structured dialogues, and getting more folks into the room for those. Braver Angels' convention is coming up in summer of 2026. That's going to be a big deal. Look that up. Bridge USA has grown like gangbusters since the horrible, tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk. They are in college campuses, and they have been there for some time now, and they're working to make sure that students and young people who really do crave a lot of times, us older generations look at young people as fragile. I mean, that's one narrative. It's not true. A lot of young people are coming up going, what the heck is the big deal? Why are all these teachers trying to protect us from what? Talking, So yeah, these students are awesome. And in Bridge USA chapters all across the country, just showing how it's done. It's really, really cool to watch, and they're growing really well. So I think they're doing the right thing. Disagree Better, we mentioned, and I don't know of a more promising organization, at least, that's as visible as they are, that's working directly on trying to build that shelter that elected officials can stand under to do these things in a better, braver way. Like they've got it. They're focusing a lot on kind of the air game because there's this narrative that needs to take hold, right? That all politicians are not these backstabbing, polarizing, figures that get so much of the attention out there. They're different, and they bring up a lot of stories from the local elected official world and the state level and all of that, where some really wonderful things are happening across the aisle and have been. They just nobody seems to care, right? But if you knew what were happening, you would care, and so they're bringing it up, and they're just inspiring, I think, that generation of leaders, and making sure that it's something that you don't get killed for, which is unfortunately still the case in a lot of places. So they're doing great work. I'm an advisor for an organization called the Viewpoints Project, started by Shira Hoffer. It was started by Shira when she was at an undergraduate at Harvard, and she stood at a protest in Harvard over Gaza and the war in Israel and Gaza with this sign that had a hotline, and it was between the protesters and the counter protesters, and the hotline was, your questions about what's going on, like, send them here. And she got on the map for that. I think she's brilliant. That's just one example of a young person who is starting new organizations. She's helping places in education cultivate more curious and courageous ways to disagree and make it more natural. So I'm also really interested in what's going on in the education space. There is a lot of energy coming into the education space. One way that I've kind of had a bit of a front row seat on that is my book just happened to be a popular choice for freshman college reading programs over the last couple of years. So I'm seeing all these new centers for civic dialogue and civil discourse and democracy and democratic republic and whatever it is. So lots of energy into that right now. I'm really optimistic about that. Although, coming back a little full circle, I also know that institutions are not the be all end all for everything. Just because you open a center for so-and-so and it's got a lot of money doesn't mean you're necessarily going to solve the problem, right? So all those things are encouraging to me, and I've missed a million because I know of a lot, and I don't want to bore you. So where do you want to send me from here?
Yeah, well, I know we need to wrap up here, but I wanted one last question I wanted to ask is you've been working in this space for a while. Like you say, everyone, everything that's happening out there pretty much, and I'm curious, kind of in what ways has your thinking on this kind of, or what are some main highlights of how some ways your thinking on this have kind of evolved? Is there anything you would say I was wrong about, whatever number of years ago?
Yeah. Probably, a lot. In my book that I wrote in 2020, if I could write it again, I would say a lot more about fear. I focused on certainty as an archvillain to curiosity, because when you think you won't think to ask, right? But the impact that fear has on our ability to be judicious and reflective and responsive rather than reactive is tremendous. And so if I write another book, I think I'm going to go right into that. I think that's kind of the plan, actually, is just jumping in. Also, the relationship between truth and trust. I think that the barrier we just kind of glanced on a little bit around truth. But what happens if I know that this is true? You still want me to... What? Like, what does that mean for the sanctity of this truth if I just go in and let somebody entertain something false? Well, how do I do that? What does that mean? And also my background as a journalist makes me super interested in this. And I think it's insanely critical right now, these questions around truth. But I don't think that you can unlock truth usefully across our society without trust. So this is where I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I might be very wrong, but I do think that we have to build trust in order to meaningfully circulate truth. And you can't build trust if you think you already have truth so much that you won't entertain what the other person is saying. So that's a real dilemma. But I don't know. So far, every time I've had a conversation with someone who believes something that I know to be false, I have learned something that is true that I didn't see before.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think you have to earn trust too, right? So I think that's an aspect of it that we think we should just have trust because we're the ones with the right. There's the little bit of the certainty thing again.
Exactly.
But yeah, the other thing there on the fear side, I think that one thing that, I think we also forget is that a lot of us wouldn't want to admit it's fear. Like, we're strong. I'm a tough guy. I can't be afraid. It must not be fear. It's something else, right? It's anger. It's something else. Especially, I think maybe that's more true for men, that these other kind of emotions come out because, we're not allowed. Fear is not allowed, right?
And you know who is the scariest person to confront? Yourself.
Well, it's also almost impossible.
Well, that's the thing. It's like it's therapy speak, and people go, "Oh, that's woo woo." It's also true, yo. Like, yeah. I've seen it. It's true. The scariest person to confront, especially if your identity is really, firm on this or that thing, is yourself. That's where the rubber meets the road, and you'll justify it. You'll say that it's actually that person, or it's actually what's going on over here, but those may be rationalizations. Fear is so sneaky. It's really, really tricky to even get to talking about it and understanding.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I mean, this is great. I could talk to you for hours. I know you don't have that kind of time for little old me, but I really appreciate you making time for our show, Mónica Guzmán.
Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. Thank you.
That is it for this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. For links to everything we talked about on this episode, go to outrageoverload.net. Outrage Overload is a Connors Institute podcast. The Connors Institute for Nonpartisan Research and Civic Engagement at Shippensburg University works to disseminate high-quality, nonpartisan information to the American public around issues of societal well-being, democracy promotion, and news literacy. If you found this episode valuable, please share it or leave a review. It really helps. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.